Hey, everybody. Welcome to With Thunder's Applause, a podcast where two friends get together and talk about the events and ideas that will shape our uncertain future. I am your host, Steve, along with my co host, Zach. What is up?
Stress management, breathing, all the bullshit that they send you through as a veteran who's just trying to get better.
I know, right? It's fucked up.
So one of the very first things they said in the group counseling was, we can't talk about politics. And I was like, then why am I fucking here? Like if I don't get a vent, about how like everything is politics. I don't necessarily think that a lot of people, are thinking about that. Like, you choose to go to church, it ends up being political. You pay your taxes, that's political. You decide what to buy, that's political. And so, during the meeting, someone mentioned like, oh yeah, there's a holiday coming up. Oh, what holiday is it? Oh, it's Juneteenth. Oh, what's that about? And like, the counselor didn't know the answer to that question off the top of her head. It's been 3 years. You've had this day off for 3 years. How can you not know what the fuck it's about? You didn't take the time to look it up,
What, Juneteenth?
Yeah. And so I stepped in, and I might be like a little bit wrong. I'm not going to say what I said because I don't want to be wrong online. But, I was definitely closer than not knowing at all. It's just like, oh, dear God. All right, I'll come out. What was that?
So that's hilarious.
Yeah. And so I was just like, well, I sure hope you're not stirring up shit, because we have a black man in the chat. And like, if you were just trying to be provocative, like, that would be very upsetting on the first meeting. All right.
But weren't you trying to be intentionally provocative?
By knowing what it's about?
Yeah.
No, I'm trying to be informed. I was just really surprised that the person in charge didn't know what it was for. It's like, I looked it up right away. I think I actually heard about it before we got it off for the first day. And I was like, cool. One of the guy who asked was like, there's too many holidays. And everybody was like, what the fuck are you talking about? We need like 2 holidays per month in order to make this shit even livable. Like, good God.
At the same wage.
Yeah. And people are fucking brainwashed, man. Like, well, if you don't work, you shouldn't be getting money. And it's like, no, man, you got to have some time off, some reasons to celebrate, and know that you can celebrate them.
Yeah, and as we've discussed on this show before, Americans already work like ridiculously more hours than most people.
More hours, and then like put themselves in more stressful situations during the hours that they do work, like thinking that if they don't do everything they're supposed to do, the world's gonna fall apart. And it's like,
yeah,
I don't know what job you're working, man, but if I put things off for one day, no one's even gonna notice if I don't tell them.
Yeah. So we've been blessed with a really mild spring, but boy, is it getting hot in here. Today on the show, we're going to talk a little bit about climate change issues. Just a couple super quick points, things I thought were interesting. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Ukraine war. And then we're going to finish up with an interesting discussion on the whole philosophy of central heating and air.
We're going to finish up with that.
Because that's what we do here, is an eclectic mix of things woven with a fine silk thread of doom and gloom.
Where did we get the silk from? Was it organically sourced?
Isn't all silk organic?
Yes.
I guess maybe if the trees they're growing, they're using like various chemicals to have a good tree crop to feed the silkworms, maybe.
Exactly.
But like, I'm no advocate for agricultural toxins whatsoever. But I haven't seen, and maybe it's because I haven't looked hard enough, but I haven't seen much evidence to say how that passes down through multiple transformations.
Not only that, but I mean, especially if it's just silk, you're just wearing the clothes. It's okay.
Like, and if so, say silk has whatever molecular structure, right? Like it's a carbon, right? Or even potentially a hydrocarbon. A carbohydrate or something?
I think it's I think a carbohydrate would break down too quickly.
Okay. Now we're wondering what the fucking molecular structure of silk is. Jesus.
We're doing it. Let's see.
People want to know.
It is a hydrocarbon.
I
think
figured it was a
no,
carbohydrate. Oh,
no.
it's
I'm
not.
sorry. No. It doesn't have any carbon. It is made of nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen in various
Okay. So it's more like,
ranges.
yeah, it's like hair or something.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know what hair is made of, but let's not look that up. But
We
yeah,
won't. But hair takes
I do
forever to
think
break
there's
down.
more nitrogen. And I just know that like feathers and
Mm,
hair and stuff are good in compost. So
interesting. Yeah.
generally that means they have a decent balance of the things the microbes need: oxygen, the nitrogen, whatever.
Steve's over his compost pile with a Floby. Just
Speaking of which, I can't go in the sun because this fucking doxycycline I'm on, but
right.
I have some compost that's been hot for a while and it's finally come down into like active but not hot.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to turn it to keep it hot. I probably should have turned it like 4 or 5 days ago, but me. At any rate.
Aren't your children getting to be like almost 10 years old? Can't you put them into labor?
Dude, I don't wish turning compost on anybody. It's so fucking hard.
When I lived with your sister and your brother-in-law.
That's why I fucking hate, like, we're not going to bash vegans either. We're talking about other things. But anyway, saying that making compost humans can do and you don't need animals to assist in your fertility cycling, nutrient cycling, is absolute horseshit, because making compost is fucking hard. It's hard work. It's not hard, like, technically. Like, I mean, to be really good at it, it is quite a skill. But just to be proficient at it, it's not that much work. But the actual physical labor of managing a compost pile is just, I don't like doing it, but I had slaughter waste, so it's the best means we have to get rid of slaughter waste. The hot compost.
So it's my dream to one day have a cylindrical barrel that I feed new compost into, and I can crank on one end and spin it, through a chain system on the other. That way I don't have to like actually turn it over every few days. I can just spin a thing around, which is decidedly less effort and at the perfect height, because I would design it that way. But you know what? The hardest damn thing is coming up with a cylinder.
You know what I would do? I would do, and this is not necessarily, because there's some appropriate tech stuff here near the end, so it's not completely off base, and appropriate tech stuff on conversation always. But the ideal situation is that you would have multi-family housing blocks that all feed into a central digester, and then you would have an auger driven probably by bicycle for like the zero fossil fuel scenario, or on like a 5-horse motor connected to the same structure, mechanical structure, and run an auger to turn it.
Yeah.
And then you could set a separate auger to like pull the compost out when it's done. And then that way you're not shoveling or anything like that.
In my mind, the outer layer of the cylinder is a mesh that is just big enough to let like loose particles that have been digested to fall through. And if you don't like what you see, you can feed it back in. But yeah, I've always wanted to do that, but never been in a permanent place to do it.
Yeah, I was thinking about building a compost sifter out of a small like office trash can that's that metal mesh.
Yeah.
Even if the chunks are like a 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch or whatever, like that's not a big deal in compost. You just don't want like chunks of wood and chunks of manure and shit like that.
Entire melon. Yeah.
Yeah. It's mostly for sifting worm compost, so it gets kind of goopy, but it's usually pretty fine. Yeah. Anyway, let us move into
the Mos Eisley Cantina.
Stuff. Yes.
Let's head over to the Mos Eisley Cantina.
Mos Eisley
AKA
Cantina.
The Star Wars Cantina. Damn it. I got myself off track.
What are we doing today?
This is 2 insurance companies deciding that we in California suck butt.
The smoky air that shut down so much outdoor activity in the Northeast last week was a sobering reminder of the widespread impacts of wildfires and climate change. There's been a different kind of impact in California as well, one that's also partially tied to wildfires. William Brangham focuses on that part of the story and what it could mean for insurance in the Golden State.
For years, State Farm has been the largest provider of homeowners insurance in California, but it recently announced it will no longer sell new homeowners policies in the state. It said this move was driven by the high cost of construction and the growing risks from catastrophes like wildfires. State Farm's move followed a similar one by Allstate Insurance and other pullbacks from insurers like Chubb and American International Group, who decided not to renew some existing policies. So what does this mean for homeowners and other businesses in a state with existing
I just want to
policies?
point out how awesome that is.
So what does this mean for...
Right there. You got this highway coming along and this unsupported cliffside that's just been doing landslides for years, apparently.
Who decided not to renew some existing policies. So what does this mean for homeowners and other businesses in a state with increasing risks from wildfire and other extreme climate-driven events? Michael Wara is a lawyer and senior fellow at the Woods Institute for the Environment at Stanford University. Michael, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's driving this move by the insurance companies? I mean, they cited these two risks, the increasing risk of fires burning structures, and then the increased cost of building or rebuilding those structures. What else is there?
Well, I think what's driving a lot of this instability in the insurance market really has to do with the rapidly changing risk of wildfire interacting with a regulatory system, which by design changes quite slowly and in particular allows price increases that occur very slowly. And so we sort of have a lag, and the challenge layered on top of that has been, as everyone has experienced, increasing inflation, and in California, particularly increasing costs for construction. So the insurers are stuck between quickly increasing risk and slowly increasing allowed insurance pricing.
So you mean that if the insurers were really treating this as the cost of doing business, they might increase rates more rapidly than the state allows by law?
Oh,
that's right. I think many of the insurers...
They would seek maximum profit at all costs. How weird.
Right. So this isn't quite the end of the clip, is it?
No, it's not. We got another 50 seconds.
Okay. So I'll interject my point here, or my response to you, which is like, yes, of course they're going to chase profit, but at the same time, like, insurance is a risk management. That's what they do.
Right. And so they are doing their job, what their stock owners want them to do, which is, of course, minimize risk. And California is risky. Because I paused while you were gone, and I showed that not only is it wildfires, it's erosion, it is landslides, mass wasting of every variety that you can think of, that is basically making it so that California is a hell of a place to live in.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I do think that it's relevant that, like, they're like, it's too risky, because again, I think Oliver Stone, the famous director, just did he's been doing media circuits on some of the channels I watch, talking about his new documentary called Nuclear Now. And, you know, I go back to the several conversations we've had about nuclear energy, both electric production and weapons and all that stuff, and the technology behind all of that. And something that people kept bringing up in the chat, which was that I was on board with, is about like insurance industry, right? And people dismissed it and they said, well, who cares what the insurance industry thinks? And it's like, the insurance industry, like that's what they do, is they look at things and they say, if something went bad, could we make that payment with the premiums that we've been collecting?
Yeah.
And the answer is no, but if we could charge them higher premiums, we could make it. I'm sure if they could charge unlimited premiums, and they might have that capacity in the nuclear industry, for example, like they would charge high enough, and then the nuclear industry would be like, we can't afford insurance. And that's like, it's because we can't afford you to fuck up. Right. And the same with homeowners insurance. It just kind of sucks. I understand why the state of California like caps insurance increases. It's a consumer protection thing, and it works in a lot of cases.
Yeah, similar to our electrical prices.
But ultimately, And here's a perfect example of like it backfiring, because it is so dangerous to live in parts of California,
right?
That they won't insure those homes. And these large insurance companies might have been like, if we're just doing like commercial real estate, like insurance, damage or whatever insurance, like there's not enough money in the California market to cross the minimum thresholds, because there's all sorts of like licensing and filing fees and all sorts of oversight that they have to pay for,
right,
to operate as an insurance company, because it's highly regulated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so at any rate, they're just like, this market's not worth it for us.
Well,
There's not enough customers that we're willing to insure, basically. Sorry.
Right. No, you're right. And it's just like with dental and stuff like that. Like there's not enough easy marks, the people that brush their teeth twice a day and, make sure that they're not going to get any cavities. You don't have enough of those in the housing market to pay for the risky people, those that are like, brushing your teeth is for sissies and I don't ever floss. What I thought was interesting is like in the past, as a species, we went where the resources were. If you found out that resources were no longer available, you'd move. But with modern capital and systems and stuff like that, you can pretty much live almost anywhere and have everything trucked in. And so now it's almost like the insurance companies are the ones who are going to determine where we live because they're going to be like, no, you can't live in the middle of nowhere in the mountains anymore just because you want to have 10 acres and never see your neighbor. Like that's too costly. You can't afford insurance. You're not going to be able to get a loan for it. So unless you're able to buy it outright with cash, you can't do that. We say no.
So that was a big question I had that I'll save for the end because we have 50 seconds left.
We do.
Insurers have been slowly increasing rates since catastrophic fires that your viewers may remember occurred in 2017 and 2018, the Napa Sonoma fires, and then the Camp Fire after that. That really reset insurers' vision of what kinds of catastrophes were really possible in the state of California. And that increased risk needs to be priced into rates eventually. The California insurance regulatory system allows for very slow adjustment in prices and doesn't allow currently for insurers to price in the risk of climate change as it is today. The prices are set by looking backwards at the risk as it has been over the last 2 decades. And that just means a slower pace of adjustment. And that's leading to real problems for the industry.
And so what does this mean for homeowners? And
so speaking of the Camp Fire, it honestly surprises me that PG&E is continued to allow to exist, given the existence.
Come back just the two of us?
I am. Given just the
sorry.
It's okay. Just the massive size of these insurance companies. Like you think they would be like, my dudes, what the hell is going on here? We just had to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars in fire losses, and we hear it's your fault. I'm really surprised that they didn't go after PG&E and just destroy them. Because I kept hearing like, this is going to be the nail in the coffin for PG&E. They knew it was going to happen, blah, blah, blah. Still who I pay my electric bill to.
Nah, dude, they fucking... That's the funny thing about things like insurance and banks and everything else. It's supposed to be highly regulated, but it's regulated on behalf of the banks. That's what neoliberalism is, right?
No!
So, of course, PG&E is going to exist. What happened to you?
What are you talking about?
I lost you.
You didn't lose me. I'm right here.
Okay, something happened.
Oh, I changed the tab. I changed the tab ahead of time. It's called being a producer and getting everything ready.
Okay, I just don't see our dashboard. That's why I'm confused.
Dashboard?
Because that's usually what I watch. So I know when you pull stuff up or move on. But anyway.
Oh, the OBS feed. Gotcha.
Yeah. Anyway, we kind of screwed it up. By the way, we started super late because we were having technical difficulties. And really, what happened? I probably just left my computer on for a long time, and it forgot the last time we were in this system doing a live stream. And so it was double audio feeding, and it was a pain in the ass. So we were super late troubleshooting that. So anyway, my comment was about insurance, right? Like you have to have homeowners insurance. And like the big thing is always,
there we go. Got it for you again.
You know, when I've advocated for like social housing or alternative housing, or what really kind of could be conceived of is like coherent cottage villages
Mm-hmm.
as a inexpensive housing solution, especially for like the elderly and infirm that wind up on the street, including like young men with traumatic brain injuries or other kind of mental illnesses. At any rate, in discussing that with various kinds of development folks at city and county governments, is they're always like, you need to be able to fund that because banks don't loan on that stuff because that kind of stuff is hard to insure. Because there's like formulas and the insurance companies need to balance their risk. And so they need to know that this house is the same as this house in terms of how they're calculating things.
Right.
And so if they're saying they're not going to insure housing, like, to me, there seems to be a simple solution is you have like, they're not going to insure it. And it's going to be even harder to build it because you can't get someone to insure it.
Right.
Which
and the cost of labor, the cost of lumber, the cost of everything is going up too.
Which they touched on, which was another reason why the cost on the claim would be higher so not only is the risk greater, but the replacement cost is greater.
Right.
And so their overall kind of risk measurement is much, much higher than they're comfortable with. But I'm just saying, like, the solution to this is just to fucking release or publish a set of basic engineering principles and then allow people to build what they kind of housing they deem is sufficient or appropriate for them on private property.
Kind of like we did
you have to get it permit and this, that, and the other thing, because the person who buys it needs to be able to insure it. And if it's not done the proper way, the insurance company won't insure it, right?
I mean, I think we've already done that with earthquake proofing. And so
in some ways, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and so it's not unprecedented that we would do the same for fire. Say like,
I don't mean the government being an insurer of last resort.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying
so much.
I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is currently there is a standard for earthquake preparedness for all buildings. They have to meet it, or you can't construct it. Why not do the same thing for fire? And a lot of times it wouldn't even rely upon the house itself. It would say like, the property around the house out to X 100 feet is cleared of woodlands or everything like that. You're basically
see, that's the thing. There already are standards.
Oh, okay.
Like Paradise is being rebuilt with a fire safe standard.
Okay.
Which has like vents so the embers don't get sucked into attics. Because like a lot of it's not like there's a bunch of like brush right next to houses. A lot of it is just their presence with all of these flammable things, and you just roll the dice enough times, right? And it eventually comes up with you lose everything.
I mean, with mandated solar panels, it's kind of silly that we haven't mandated like roof mounted water, like misting systems or whatever.
There's not enough water, dude.
Well, yeah, but we can pretend there is. Or we've been doing it for like 40 years.
What you need is public investment, and the government doesn't believe that it's their responsibility to ensure people have housing, even though I'm pretty sure when you say life, liberty, and property, life requires shelter.
Well, not only that, but there's an international.
Your basic needs are not met. Sorry, go ahead.
There's an international agreement that the U.S. is part 2 that states that housing is a basic human requirement and that it will be provided. And of the countries that are part to that agreement, the U.S. is the only one who hasn't made that happen.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't surprise me. The U.S. doesn't give a fuck.
Make America great someday. Mags.
We are a failed state. And people don't realize it. Check this out, though.
What do we got? Oh, it's a radiation and screen. I don't think they knew.
Scream, but
I don't think they knew about radiation when that guy was alive.
No, but it's a fucking rad shirt, dude.
It's a very nice shirt.
I fucking love it.
Did you get it for yourself?
I bought a couple of new t-shirts because like most of my shit like starts to fucking wear at the collar.
Yeah.
I
don't buy anymore.
Cheek, and my girlfriend just says I look like a fucking bum.
See, I have this wonderful thing called a wife, and wife, at least wife 2.0, just buys t-shirts for you and is like way better at it than you would ever be.
Oh no, I bought this on my phone.
That's what I'm saying. You need to get like wife 2.0. So she will be able to buy t-shirts for you and just be like, you know what? He looked good in that.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't want to get too much into that, but like I don't mind that, and often that's her solution because I hate shopping. But I just got these online. Figured if I needed some new t-shirts, I was going to get some good ones.
Nice.
I got some actually really good ones. Let's move on.
Let us move on.
So we are already way behind because that was supposed to take like
2 or 3 minutes. I believe we are on the Tufts University.
Okay, that's me. Come on my screen.
Let's head to the Mos Eisley Cantina. No, wait, no. Dex's Diner.
That's you.
Zoom in.
Yes, of course.
Enhance.
So I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, but this is something that Paul Beckwith talked about today. And as I've said before, I love the man and I love his dogs and his approach, but he is not clip worthy. He talks way too slow. Even though, like, we talk pretty slow too.
I can always speed things up 50, 75, 100%. Just saying.
Yeah. And when I say slow, it's not just his basing, it's a lot of his filler words too. Like it just
he speaks like he's writing a manifesto from the 1800s.
Yes. So a new study from the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy at Tufts University showed the likelihood of extreme weather in wheat-producing areas of the U.S. and China has increased significantly. The world's getting hotter, no shit, causing shifts in seasonal patterns, no shit, and increasing the amount of extreme weather such as severe droughts and heat waves, no shit, which can affect crop yields and food supplies. We all knew this was the consequence. A recent study led by a researcher at the school found that the likelihood of extreme temperatures that could affect crop yields has increased significantly, which they just said already. Findings predict heat waves that happened approximately once every 100 years in 81 are now likely to happen once every 6 years in the Midwestern U.S. and once every 16 years in Northeast China. The work shows the range of conditions that people need to prepare for, even if they haven't occurred yet. The historical record is no longer a good representation of what we can expect for the future, the author said. We live in a changed climate, and people are underestimating current day possibilities for extreme events. And we don't need to go through the rest of it. I thought that 1 in 100 year crop failure, or not, I mean, you can have a functional crop failure, right? Like you can pull bushels of wheat out of the field, but like if you don't get enough money for that wheat to cover your costs of planting that field,
crop
it doesn't
failure.
really matter.
Yeah,
it's a crop failure.
Even though you just made food, that food could feed somebody somewhere. That's a failure. Welcome to the planet we live on.
I mean, not just that, but I mean, agriculture is about producing a surplus, right? You have to get more energy out than you put in. So
yeah, but I mean, if you're just measuring that in dollars, that's kind of a bullshit metric for you.
Well, I mean, you could measure it in labor and seed input. If like it took a person, 6 months to produce a wheat crop, but like he only produces enough, food for his family for a month, and none for sale.
Yeah, true.
Like that's still pretty catastrophic because like you can only get, I mean, in the best areas, you can usually get 2 crops a year. But what I was reading when I was working around this stuff, and you can come back up 84, if you haven't already. And then, so where was I? Oh, just, agriculture takes years, right? Like you have to plant, even in the better areas. But what I was reading around it is that like the sweet spot is around like 28 degrees C, and most places are likely probably going to be unable to do to double crop wheat, like a summer wheat and a winter wheat. And summer wheat will be only at the highest latitudes, and everywhere else will have to be winter wheat. You're so lucky.
Why am I lucky?
Because you just get to smoke weed in your house.
It's not great. I mean, we don't do a lot of it, so it's not that bad.
Yeah, but I just have to wait until we're done.
Well, yeah, but it's also vaping. I assume you're going for the full.
Oh, I roll joints.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't vape.
Yeah. So
maybe I should get a vape pen just for when we're doing them shows.
It still produces combustion
Tar
products. Yeah. So I mean, like, I'm sure eventually I'll notice, like, oh, this over here is kind of yellow. I wonder why that is. Anyway.
All right, we're moving on to the Ukraine.
Yes. What we got here?
Do you want to do this whole first 3 minutes of this crux?
What about Shelby Holiday with the Wall Street
No,
Journal?
we should do her because I think that's only a minute and a half, right?
Okay, so do Crux first, so we have a moment.
No, you could do Shelby first. I think that's only a minute and a half, though.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, play that whole minute and a half, and then I'll think about the next one.
There's been a major shift in the war in Ukraine. Kyiv has launched a counteroffensive along the front lines to retake territory, and Russia has been getting hit behind its own lines. In Moscow, there have been multiple aerial drone attacks. In the border town of Belgorod, violent incursions. In Crimea, an attack on an oil depot. And throughout Russia and Russian-controlled territory, there have been strikes on refineries, railways, and all kinds of other infrastructure. As Ukraine launches the counteroffensive everyone's been talking about, we mapped out some of the early signs of its strategy and the obstacles it has to overcome.
Victory.
Let's start on the front lines.
I just want to say, what a world we live in where, like, wars are live streamed, more or less. Like, how do you hide shit when there's satellites fucking everywhere? Like, there are no secrets anymore. You're like, oh, we're gonna move some tanks over here. Shit, they knew we were moving those tanks over there. Like, unless you do things in tunnels.
Well, I mean, that's just kind of without satellites, because satellites, you can move stuff between a satellite passing over a place, right? Like,
there's so many satellites, my dude.
I know, but like most of the good surveillance is still coming just from drones, dude.
Okay.
Like that's, because
I mean, that is why we were so worried about the Chinese balloon thing going on, as we discussed in that episode. Adding that to the notes.
Yeah, no, but seriously, I'm really surprised, only knowing the U.S. and like the drone war in the Middle East, Africa, and Afghanistan, Central Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan. This is like the first like significant conflict between like wealthier, more technologically advanced countries. The first conflict between them. Because the thing going on in Sudan right now, like elsewhere in Africa, these kind of like more minor civil conflicts or whatever, and horrific as they may be, they're not really using drones to monitor positions.
Right.
I mean, they might have some access to like small drones. I'm not following it closely, like like Amazon drones or whatever.
Yeah. You can deliver,
but not sophisticated military drones that drop bombs. Like they're so widely used, it's remarkable. I think Russia just attacked a drone factory near Kiev the other day to try and knock it out.
Even with lighter Amazon drones, there was a reporter who was talking about being in the Middle East and talking to people, and basically the people on the defensive from the United States attack were using smaller drones with small IEDs to just send in boom.
And we talked about this when we were speculating about how to siege the Hamptons.
Oh, that's right.
Whatever.
All right. Yeah. Seizing the Hamptons.
How many drones would it take to siege Martha's Vineyard, man?
We got to figure out where that episode is. I can make that.
It was like a while back, probably a year ago. When our internet was fucking way shittier and we had really poor quality shows.
Yeah. So, that's true. Look at us now. We've got a Starfield behind us. Everything's looking good.
We're moderately better.
How can we do better, people? Tell me. Anyway.
Better cameras, I'm sure.
In
studio sets.
Not even camera studio sets. There we go. Lighting. I hate my lighting. It reflects in my eyeglasses. It's terrible.
I only noticed it now because I never look at you with the eyes. I'm always staring at your cleavage. Just fucking with you, man.
What was I saying?
I don't know. You lost me.
You fucked me up. It's my titties. We're cutting this out, asshole.
I'm just kidding. Sorry, go ahead.
No. It's okay. Wow, I need to rewind time so I can remember what the hell I was saying. Oh, well. Moving on.
Continuing this clip, right?
Fuck me up. Critical hit. Bam.
They stretch for some 600 miles, and experts say Ukraine has begun to strike in various places to probe for weaknesses. Ukraine has already had some success, with Ukrainian troops raising flags as they liberate towns in the east. But Russia currently controls some 20% of Ukraine's territory, shaded in light red. And Ukraine will have to push through the huge trenches, minefields,
not pink, light red,
and ditches that Russia has built to defend.
She's kind of like, oh, no, she's talking about it now, but she's basically kind of like, oh, yeah, and for Ukraine to succeed, they'll have to get through Russian defenses. And she's kind of just like, but without really kind of showing some images, but without really digging deep into how fucking fortified they are. So we're going to discuss that further. I have the Financial Times published a really great set of maps. So we're going to look at that right after this.
Defend that territory. Adding to the challenges, much of this land is flat and open. That makes Ukraine's troops and equipment vulnerable to strikes, especially since it doesn't have the support of aircraft to provide cover.
Remember how big of a deal it was when Germany was like, sure, we'll give them our fucking Leopard tanks, which are highly advanced.
Right.
And the US was like, we're going to give them, these really nice tanks. And then they wound up giving like some mediocre tanks and some armored personnel carriers. Like after they duped fucking Germany into giving better tanks, I think like almost everybody in Europe is transferring some kind of weapons over to Ukraine right now.
Everything I've read, yeah. It's almost
but look at this. So they had, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I was looking for good numbers. And I couldn't put them together before the show. But when we say they sent like a bunch of tanks, we're talking about like 30 or 40 or whatever. I think in total they probably had like, maybe a few hundred, 300, 400, 500 of various types, not all the same quality or field function, right? Some of them are just to quickly move troops from one place to another when you're like reinforcing areas or whatever. Anyway, you can see here that on, I think it was just one day in the offensive, and she doesn't say where this is, but there was an incident where they were pressing through a minefield, and I think Russia rocketed several of their mine clearing tanks, like tanks that are outfitted with the equipment necessary to clear a minefield. And they took them out, and then like they all got fucking pinned down basically, and then tried to retreat through a minefield, and it was a fucking mess. And so all of that you could do, you do this twice over, just what you see on the screen here, 7, 8, 10 vehicles. You do that fucking twice. The cost of those that the U.S. sent over, you could probably house most every, except the most extremely difficult cases of unhoused people.
Yeah.
Like most people don't need that much to get back up.
And getting people back up saves money overall.
For what we sent over, and was just, I think at least the Bradley, which is a kind of like lightly armored vehicle. It's more of a personnel carrier, I believe, with like a, probably like a 50 cal or something up top. At any rate, we sent over a bunch of those, and a bunch got destroyed all at the beginning. We're only in the first week of this supposed counteroffensive, and like they've lost 10%, 15, 20% of the equipment. We just went through painful political processes and international negotiations to deliver, and they fucking blew their load in like fucking 5 days. And yet they're still going, as we showed last Thursday, still going on the press being like, oh no, they're just saying we're losing because they're losing. Like it's fucking absurd. And anyway, continue the clip.
So the U.S. sent over 100 Bradley tanks. Low end, that's $500 million. They're 4.35 each a boot. And so 16 is what? 8 times 4, 32 million.
Yeah,
right there, with probably a rocket or a few rockets that cost.
Not all. I'm not really sure exactly what we're looking at.
Yeah,
I think most of those are Bradleys, except the one in the bottom with the big turret. Like you see how the other one has like a smaller turret and just like a machine gun sized barrel on it.
This guy,
yeah, and just the one at the very foreground has an actual tank turret.
It's
I am not qualified to say what those are.
Right. I am qualified to say that it's interesting to me because even if you back up a little bit,
vulnerable to strikes, especially since it doesn't.
It shows like a whole lot of tanks and not a lot of nothing else. And that could be survivor bias. It could be that every other vehicle was able to get away, or it could be that these are being sent without escort, which would be weird to me.
Oh, no. So that's part of the problem, is I understand it. And again, I'm not an expert. There's a lot of people covering this that are much better than me, but I think it's fascinating and I wanted to cover it. Plus, it fit within our theme of it. Things are getting hot. It's a hot war. At any rate, no, there were long columns. They were utilizing a tactic developed early in the invasion of Iraq. One of the field generals or field commanders, I think he might have been a colonel or something, pushed his unit, they spaced him out 150 meters apart and fucking ran straight through and did like a whole like 360 assault kind of thing until they got to a position they could fortify and operate out of in part of the city. So they basically were able to push through the outer defenses and actually make a hold in the city so they could start the long, difficult work of fucking urban combat, which I wouldn't wish on anybody.
Spacing does seem to be key, though.
Yeah, then they spaced them out. And here, I think that their columns were closer. And also what they had in Iraq and didn't have in this case is that Ukraine is not a fucking, like a lot of their like high-end, like their experienced command staff has been eliminated. Like they're constantly talking about like there was one officer left in this entire fucking unit at the end of this battle or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Like their losses are fucking huge. And so anyway, a lot of their people are inexperienced. They're grabbing people off the street and putting a gun in their hand and throwing them out on the front. Like, and so it's ugly, but they had no air assets because they don't really have any, right? Except the little drones, which are just, it's not cost effective to try and fly around and shoot those down. Right.
Right.
I think they have like various rocket systems that can target the drones, but at any rate, they also didn't have a coordinated artillery attack. So they tried to ram these vehicles down real quick, and like they did take some ground. We'll discuss on a next clip, but it has not been going well. So carry on.
All right.
Doesn't have the support of aircraft to provide cover. Plus, the destruction of this dam in Kherson flooded a key part of the battlefield. Both sides blamed each other, but the destruction could ultimately hurt Ukraine. Not only has the flooding forced thousands of people from their homes, it makes it hard for Ukrainian troops to cross this river, which ultimately makes it harder for them to sever the land bridge between Russia and Crimea. And it makes it easier for Russia to move troops and equipment to other parts of the front lines. Now let's look at the attacks inside Russia and Russian-controlled territory. Hits on oil depots, railways, and other infrastructure are known as shaping operations. They show how Ukraine is trying to choke Russia's supplies off while simultaneously attacking the front line.
I mean, it's just like how Russians would burn the wheat fields on the way out. Like, fuck it, you can't have it.
Yeah, or as soon as the first nukes fly, I was watching something about preparing for World War III on Survival Dispatch, which tends to be pretty decent, but they were talking about World War III, and then when they brought up nukes, like their fucking target list was not grounded in any reality, considering I've studied the issue pretty closely and like spent a lot of time thinking about how that might go down. They're basically like, if you live in a large city, you're a target. Well, not exactly. They're going to target ports. They're going to target fucking refineries. They're going to target train depots. They're going to target military installations. First, ones that have like early warning missile radars and also have like our mobile nuclear forces. So the Air Force bases and naval bases that house the subs and the bombers and all these things. Those are going to be their first target. They're not going to be like, oh, like Fresno, right? You're like 500,000 people live in Fresno. It is a potential target if they are like, our goal is max death. But I just don't see max death being their first objective.
Transportation destruction.
What's that?
The transportation destruction. That's what you aim for. Just make it so people can't feed themselves.
Yeah, but you're going to start with like the fucking like one nuke could probably knock out the 3 refineries in Martinez, and another one in Richmond to maybe knock out huge section of the Bay Area just by radiation, but also knock out the Chevron refinery there, potentially another one at the Port of Oakland.
Yeah.
You know, and that's all you need to do, and you've just like crippled the entire West Coast.
Yeah.
Because without those 4 refineries, and if they hit the refineries in Southern California too, and the Port of Long Beach, like most of the West Coast would be shut down to anything. Like we wouldn't have fucking fuel. And we sure as shit wouldn't be getting it because whatever is available would be going to the military. Right?
And then doctors, because we're nice.
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking about all the other wars and Great Depressions where they're like, doctors get all the gas they need because they're helping.
Yeah, hospitals. No, you're right. In the sense that I was thinking about that today. I was like, hospitals would be first on that list.
Yeah.
Probably. I mean, not first. The military and police would be first, and then hospitals.
You better believe that the hospital would start to be like, how much money do you make a year? Oh, okay, we'll put you at the bottom of the list, sir.
Yeah. Emergency services would get it. I think in a scenario like that, though, I don't think that they would really be concerned about insurance.
That's true.
If they're treating like burn victims from a fucking nuke.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think insurance is going to factor.
Even now,
everybody's just going to be like this. Ah.
Even now, they would help you, and then you would just file for everything afterwards, and you'd be like, I don't have a house, I don't have a job, that's all gone. Thank you, bye-bye. And my name is John Doe.
Right, exactly. It's
Ukraine staged similar attacks last year using US-made HIMARS before retaking key territory. Now it's armed with British Storm Shadow missiles that are fired from aircraft, which allow it to hit targets even farther away. That could force Russia to push supplies further from the fighting and complicate its delivery of food, fuel, and ammo to troops. In Belgorod, cross-border incursions are forcing civilians to evacuate and exposing gaps in Russia's defenses. They've been carried out by Russian fighters who oppose the Kremlin and have ties to Kyiv. That's led local officials to call on Moscow to send reinforcements.
Those are
moving
Nazis
soldiers
who live in Russia who have aligned with the Nazi regime in Ukraine.
Okay.
That's who that is.
I mean, Nazis everywhere, I guess.
Away from these front lines and into Russian territory could ultimately weaken Russia's defenses and help Ukraine try to take back some of its land. There have also been drone attacks in Moscow, over the Kremlin, and in wealthy suburbs. No one has been.
I like that, wealthy suburbs. You guys are fighting the good fight.
Well, what they're trying to do is make it difficult because so the rich people are like, no, stop this.
Yeah, we don't.
The only people that get listened to by governments.
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
But with buildings cordoned off, windows shattered, and drone fragments in plain view, these attacks have shattered the perception in Russia that the conflict is playing out in some faraway land.
Yeah,
officials in Ukraine have
Yeah,
100%.
Poor drone, I knew thee well.
Denied being behind them, but Russian President Vladimir Putin has blamed Kyiv.
Это, конечно, явный признак террористической деятельности.
How is it terrorists if you're at war?
It's
not terrorist activity. It's warfare. It's a clear sign of warfare.
Yeah,
these attacks undermine
agents in your country.
Yeah.
Putin's narrative that the so-called special military operation is going as planned. And they've also fueled internal divisions, with the head of the Wagner paramilitary group lashing out at Russian defense officials.
Вы являетесь Министерством обороны. Вы не сделали ни хера для того, чтобы наступать. Какого хуя?
So how are these attacks being viewed outside of Russia and Ukraine? So far, Western countries like the US have continued to funnel aid to Kyiv. And if Ukraine shows that it can use that...
He's wild.
Huh? Oh, the Wagner
He's wild. I'm not entirely sure. I saw some evidence. I don't follow it closely enough, but I'm starting to get the vibe that he might fucking take some kind of amnesty deal and fucking cut. But I don't know him well enough. But that's the leader or CEO or whatever of that private military group that's been operating part of the Russian front.
Yeah, mercenaries, bounty hunters. We don't need their scum.
And effectively, they could supply even more powerful weapons down the road.
We can.
But they don't want a broader conflict.
We have been very clear with the Ukrainians. Privately, he's certainly been clear publicly.
What's that?
Nothing. I'm just doing voiceover commentary because I realize this is the Wall Street Journal. I'm trying to avoid copyright.
Okay. Well, then, yeah.
Sorry.
That we do not support attacks inside Russia.
And there's another important country watching all of this closely. China has signaled that it does not want to see
international waters.
But I heard that was the Swiss or some other group that is not us.
Perhaps. I don't really like
What's that?
I don't really like this background. It doesn't really work well.
I have no. I actually noticed if you watch the last video, there was an update to OBS right before last one, and ever since then, it hasn't been doing such a good job. Unless you have see, unless it's a very solid background. I don't know if your mic's moving or whatever, but yeah, it shows up a lot, whereas it never showed up before. So, I don't know.
No worries, keep going. Yeah.
Russia collapse, and Presidents Xi and Putin remain close. So if it looks like Russia can't stand on its own 2 feet, experts say Beijing could potentially be moved to send lethal aid to Moscow, which would mark a major new phase of the war.
And that's where my concerns lie.
A new phase in the war?
Or
the nukes going to Belarus?
No, not either of those. The triggering of various international agreements of aid, and you already got this tiny country taking on a much bigger country, but getting some of the most high-tech support available from various other incredibly powerful world nations. And then you got the bigger country who has their allies, and it's just when is it going to get to the point where China is just hey, Russia's kind of been getting fucked around for a while. We're going to have to start sending supplies to our neighbors.
Yeah.
Because they're the biggest border between us and NATO.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and run the Crux clip. Crux, I looked up because I was curious. They are a appendage of Stansbury Research, which is an independent research organization that does various research on mostly financial markets, it seems. And then they sell that, right? My ex used to work for a company that did the same thing. They just sit in on fucking, shareholder calls and all these other things. They, participate in and pay attention to what's going on internally in the company. And then they report that to investors. So that investors don't have to sit on all those calls themselves. They just get a digest. Anyway, Stansbury Research does stuff like that for financial markets primarily. And I think Crux is their kind of realizing that they were already kind of covering international relations because it's important to international business, right? But wanted to do a tighter focus on that issue as kind of a separate product. And so a lot of this YouTube stuff coming through Crux is an extension of a fairly established independent research organization. And at any rate, I hope folks are not listening and can read unless you would like to dictate to them. Sure, I need to get a damp towel to dry myself off because this room is fucking hot.
I'd say open a window, but I know you probably already have.
It's already open.
All right. See you right back. Russia destroys 16 Bradleys and Ukraine counter-offensive. Ukraine losing Western armor due to lack of air cover. Battle rages East Russia and Ukraine fight along Tokmak axis. We've all heard of that. Tokmak battle key to ultimate Crimean gold. Ukraine's reported lost 16 U.S.-made Bradley armed vehicles in the past several days, as per open. Dutch open source intelligence website Oryx claims the loss of Bradley represents of the 109 U.S. fight. Moscow claimed its forces had destroyed multiple Ukrainian armored vehicles in the region, including German Leopard tanks. Is that Zaporizhzhia? Ukraine's 33rd and 47th Brigades lost at least one tank and several vital vehicles after getting stuck in a minefield outside Molotov. Reports that Ukrainian brigades likely penetrated Russia's first defensive lines for a breakthrough in Zaporizhia. The U.S. Army said the armored vehicles would be important operation for the first batch was alleged in January. It's going to hopefully enhance the capabilities to provide more advancement on the battlefield and regain lost ground by having access to Russians have Lieutenant Colonel. Probably move on track rather than be able to tank and complete 10 troops into battle while providing support fire as very small guns, bigger than a handheld. However, experts say the Bradleys would need to be used in conjunction with air support and long-range artillery. Makes sense to me. You're a very easy target if the enemy has an air force against your tanks. Though Kyiv is set to get F-16 fighter jets soon, Ukraine's military has so far lacked the air support it has desperately asked for. So it sounds like we sent hundreds of millions of dollars, even billions, of ground shit and didn't provide them with what was necessary to fix it. It just it reeks of like we're definitely supporting arms companies and making it so that they need to build even more of this shit in the future. We need to buy it and give loans to Ukraine that it'll probably never be able to pay back. Western armor debuts on most difficult taxes. The cities of Kharkiv and Malatakmaka, along with the front line in Bakhmut, is being seen as most difficult access to the Russians are fighting hard to hold the line because Bakhmut is a key railway junction and logistics hub for the Russians. So it wasn't that fun. Boring, but fun. Man, why don't they have an announcer? They should get one. Anywho, so basically, yeah, we're giving a whole bunch of money away in ground forces, but not sending necessary backup to fight against air forces. And so, of course, they're losing it all. And again, that leads me to believe that it's because we're just funneling money to arms manufacturers.
Oh, we're going to get into that a little bit more in just a minute.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting because it kind of played, it laid out some, because I follow like Weeb Union and Military Summary and like a couple others that pay for a subscription on a fairly sophisticated mapping system. And they actually like do daily or every other day, they do an update to show troop movements and how lines are moving so that you can kind of get a picture of what the actual like unit tactics on the ground look like in the context of the whole battlefield, right? Or I guess the mini battlefields that make up the war. And so I thought that this was a really great way to do that in a way that doesn't, I don't know, my eyes kind of gloss over when I hear like the 87th Brigade does this and the 37th Regiment did this and blah, blah, blah. I just like my eyes glaze over. I just like looking at them moving icons on the map. And, you know, speculating. So this provided some good context. Like, what is the actual objective of the counteroffensive? Oh, okay. First, seize this really important rail yard for supply lines. If they can do that, I will be impressed. I do not think they have it in him. And I don't think based on what we've seen in this counteroffensive, although they're like, oh, we're just probing. We haven't really thrown everything we have at them. And I'm thinking like, no, but if you lose 10 or 15% of your assets, like it's a little more than probing. Probing is when you send like a handful, maybe a few companies worth of fucking, you know, scout teams to go out and probe maybe some light armor, you know, to protect them, but you go try and figure out where everything is. That's what a fucking probing attack is. Probing attack shouldn't be like, we're going to push as hard as we can through this minefield. Oh, fuck, they're rocketing and, they're mortaring us and all this stuff. Like,
yeah.
No, I don't think they're very well organized. And most of the stuff you say, because I saw in the press too, and I thought about doing like just sharing headlines so you could see how things have changed from 5 days ago to today.
Yeah.
But it went from like, oh yeah, right, Ukraine is kicking ass because they have God on their side, right? That's what the Western press says.
What?
I mean, essentially, right? They're morally just, so
gotcha.
They're going to win or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I think the headlines I was seeing today is like offensive off to a rough start or offensive to a slow start, but there's more in the waiting in the wings.
God undecided.
Yeah, it definitely was starting to take stock of the fact that like a week in, we now know that it's largely been like most probing attacks have been repelled.
Yeah.
Very little ground has been lost. So I want to actually look at some maps now. If you want to pull up the Mos Eisley Cantina.
No, Dex's Diner. I'm the Mos Eisley Cantina.
Oh yeah, Dex's Diner. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, I go out drinking more often.
So this is from the Financial Times, A Visual Guide to the War, the Russian counteroffensive, last updated. Oh, it doesn't even say.
No.
But I just am going to scroll through and only look at the maps. We're not going to read anything except early reports from the front line so far have been mixed. Ukrainian forces claim to have liberated 7 villages, marking a break in at least one layer. Keep that in mind, because that's something that you didn't see in the certainly not in the Wall Street Journal clip. And when they say, oh yeah, we're making progress, all of these red dots, that's the Russian defensive line. So these are fucking trenches. These are tank fucking traps. These are tank obstacles. These are minefields. These are serious impediments to forward movement for Ukrainian troops, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the yellow, this is what they're claiming in the counteroffensive. Which this might seem like, oh, this is a lot. Is there a scale on here? Yeah, this line is 25 kilometers.
150 or so. Yeah.
What?
100. Oh, no, that's a way bigger line than I thought it was. That's like 40 at most.
Kilometers?
Yeah.
Wide?
Yeah, wide. That's what I'm saying.
Did they penetrate?
Right. And that's what matters, is how deep you can penetrate.
Indeed. And if you can't penetrate that deep, it's okay. Sometimes it's the motion in the ocean.
Or, just smother your opponent.
Yeah, smother your opponent. Anyway, no, I think what I've heard is the deepest they actually moved into held territory was 10 kilometers. Most places it was about 3 kilometers. And I'm not sure, it's not that much, because I remember having to run 5Ks and I hated fucking running, and I could do a 5K in like 25 minutes.
Yeah.
So like that's not fast. People were doing it in 12, 14, 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
I think 12. No. There might have been someone who did it in less than 12, but not much less. It takes a while to run a 5K. Because I think it's like, 3.2 miles or something like that. At any rate, this is not
12 minutes, 35 seconds for world champion 5Kers.
12:35?
Yep.
Okay, maybe I'm mistaken. So, but, 25 minutes is definitely not on the fast end. Nope. At any rate, these are the villages they liberated, which are just like tiny little hamlets, a few hundred people, cluster of houses. They're like, we're liberating all these villages. It's like, well, just like 2 weeks ago, you lost fucking Bakhmut, although you fucking bled pretty hard to hold on to it. Right? So, liberating a couple villages might seem like a good propaganda thing to throw out into the propaganda universe, but generally speaking, not that impressive. All right, moving on to the next one. Now, off of the counteroffensive, we're moving out in geography to the broader war. And so these reported Ukrainian partisan warfare, I think that is people behind enemy lines that are organized and like causing problems.
Right.
Whether doing hit and run attacks, I don't think they actually have like organized military units. They're just harassing the enemy.
Yeah, they're not like holding those areas.
Right, exactly. And so that's going on most places. And you can see when you scroll out to the whole of Ukraine, these little yellow blobs we were just looking at, like right here,
seem even smaller.
That's how significant they are.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's not nothing, but you certainly can't say like we took this in a week and lost 10 or 20% of our assets. We're kicking ass.
Yeah.
Right. And I could see that objective per that last video of like driving a line from here to the sea. It's kind of almost the narrowest part, right?
Yeah.
Down here to Mariupol or whatever. Mariupol.
Definitely the narrowest from where they can actually strike. Yeah.
Right. And if they do that, then they can cut transportation to Crimea. But they said that, and then I'm like, why not the Sea of Azov, or why not the Black Sea, or why not use Turkey as an intermediary? Right? Like, just because they cut this off doesn't mean that Crimea is necessarily like isolated and going to surrender.
Yeah.
I don't think I saw someone in the comments said something like that, like, oh yeah, and they're going to take Crimea back. And I was like, if Ukraine, if Russia is in genuine risk of losing Crimea, the nukes come out, in which case no one wins. Like, just fucking give it to them. It's their naval base. You can't just think they can't just, put their money into a naval base and have assets there under an agreement. And then the CIA does a coup and decides they don't want to honor the agreement and not expect them to fucking fight for it.
We should just share it a little. Come on, cut it right down the middle.
That's what I'm saying. Make all of these hotspots Israel, right? Make Jerusalem and like huge parts of Israel. Just take it from the state of Israel, make it an international city state. Make Crimea an international city state. They're just kind of like, what are these other ones like? Is it Macau? And there's like a couple others, Singapore, right? They're literally like cities that are countries. For all intents and purposes, right? Like there might be like a host government that does some functions for them, like military, but otherwise they have complete political and economic autonomy, right?
Yeah.
And let's just do that for Crimea, and then Russia can agree to have a fucking base there, and maybe everyone else can invest in infrastructure there so we can do more trade or something. I don't know. And then it goes into the Kharkova Dam, which we've already talked about last week. I'm not sure why this is not coming up. Oh, JavaScript disabled. We don't need to see that.
Yeah.
And the battle for Bakhmut, and we go, back in time, and it's not. Oh yeah, I guess I can't do any of this. At any rate, that's really what I wanted to show is where is this counteroffensive? What is it actually up against? What's the reality of that counteroffensive in the near future, and what it is in the grand context of the fucking special military operation? Which is to say, for as many fucking assets as they've lost and as many lives as they lost, they don't look to have covered much ground. Okay, you can come back up 94.
Already there.
You're already there.
Dude, I'm ahead of this. I know where things are going.
Well, I'm still looking at the map, talking about the map, dude. Remember when I'm in the other browser, I can't see what we're doing.
I know. I keep telling you, you need that second monitor.
That seems complicated.
No.
How about this? You convince my significant other to unplug one of our 3 chest freezers, and I will get a second monitor.
I'm on it.
Good luck with that, bruh.
I'm going to be there.
You're gonna be here.
Be there.
Be like, speaking of which, I'll need to talk to you offline. I talked to our good buddy that moved to Seattle today or yesterday.
Oh, thank goodness! I had not heard from my bin messaging.
Yeah, no, I'll hit you.
No response, though. Good to hear. He is alive and still has all of his organs. Hopefully,
I don't think they've sold organs yet, but he did sell his soul.
Not good. less good.
Okay, what did I say we're gonna do on this one? Can you come up, Dex's Dinah, please?
We are ready to eat.
We are ready to eat. Why am I having such a problem? Okay,
some stem
section 1, paragraph 1 and 2, section 2, paragraph 1 through 3. Grifter's gonna grift. All right. So March marks the end of the 13th month of the Russian military operation in Ukraine. Hostilities in Ukraine have slowed because March in Ukraine was a month when the roads are muddy and heavy equipment cannot pass over them. Military trenches are flooded with water and travel or evacuation becomes problematic, especially in combat areas where roads are already wrecked. Both sides in the conflict are now gathering their forces, and both sides warning about an impending large-scale counterattack by the enemy once the ground dries out sufficiently. By the way, this is the Black Agenda report, and this was written by Dmitry Kovalevich.
Yeah, I totally fucked them all up when I was, narrating that one video. I feel you, dog. So it sounds like March would have been a great time for, Russia to launch an air-based offensive.
Yeah, I think that their air assets, they're largely holding in reserve, or they find difficult to utilize. I know they have them out patrolling, but I don't think that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going on, and I don't know why they wouldn't. But you're right. I think that Russia's ultimately holding back. If they really wanted to throw their full weight behind it, like, it would have been fucking over already. I think that they're just trying to.
I mean, I think that smacks of like, oh, well, the U.S. is going to go into Iraq and it'll be over in a week. Like,
right. That's true too.
Yeah.
But honestly, I do think they're holding back.
They may very well be. I mean, we certainly held back. We didn't send in literally everything we had. That would be silly. All the rest of the world would have been like, strike Washington now.
All right. So let me continue. Ukrainian forces are being pushed into a counterattack by their Western sponsors, primarily the United States. Many voices in Ukraine and the West are worrying that support for Ukraine may wane in the face of worsening economic conditions in their respective countries. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, and ammunition continue to cross Ukraine's western border and be shipped toward the front. The United States has been soliciting and collecting these arms from its satellites around the world, including Bulgaria, Poland, South Korea, and Canada. I thought this was fascinating because we were just discussing how, like, militarily, they're really not in a great position.
Yeah.
And so then there's this kind of idea. And of course, Black Agenda Report is an anti-war website. And they do really excellent stuff on a whole bunch of things, as you can see across the top navigation bar there. But what's interesting about that is because, like, mentioning it's all like a propaganda game, right? They're like, oh, we liberated 7 villages. It's like they were like 7 little housing clusters, like, within like a mile and a half of each other, or however much 3 kilometers is. What did we say it was?
It's like 2 point something miles.
Yeah, a couple miles.
No, right? I think it's 1.6.
Yeah, exactly. So we liberated all of these villages or whatever. No, it's just a propaganda.
To the end of the horizon, anyway.
And it makes sense when the West is like, hey, you need to do something, because unless people are seeing, you were mentioning, I think offline or maybe earlier in the podcast, how like it's crazy, it's a live streamed war, but like that's part of the way they sell it. And that's why you see way more videos of like brave Ukrainian soldiers doing this than you ever see truthful stuff.
Yeah.
And I think actually fucking Putin trolled Biden about it, because apparently like there was a presentation that executive staff did or something, but they showed the picture of the same tank, like 5 different angles as like a different tank.
Oh, gotcha.
I forget exactly what he said, but it sounded like he was trolling.
You figured it out, when it was actually upside down. Like, wait a minute, tanks don't do that.
Right. So, and I wanted to read these first 3 paragraphs here because I found this absolutely fascinating. I was kind of a little familiar with some of the stuff that was going on, but this really kind of put it in some numbers and gave you gave me rather a better picture of how it's happening.
Okay.
But you had mentioned the corruption, right? So here we go.
Always.
In mid-March, a Ukrainian battalion commander gave a rather frank and honest account of the state of Ukraine's army to the Washington Post. Kupol, a lieutenant colonel, said his battalion is unrecognizable. Of about 500 soldiers, roughly 100 were killed in action and another 400 wounded, leading to complete turnover. Kupol said he was the sole military professional in the battalion, and he described the struggle of leading a unit composed entirely of inexperienced troops. Following the publication of the report, imagine this, Kupol was demoted. He then wrote a personal account of this demotion, saying the harsh reaction to his original comment showed Kiev's desire to hide at any cost data on losses and the state of the army so as not to lose U.S. funding for the coming year. Even if this means more and many deaths of Ukrainian citizens. After his demotion, Kupol quit the military service. Good for you, buddy. Many Ukrainian authorities benefit from keeping the war drawn out as long as possible for additional reasons. The bribes being paid by men to avoid their call up to obligatory military service have reached as high as $32,000 US, according to the Open Ukraine Telegram channel. The publication writes, quote, "We are helping one of our writers right now to get her son out of Bakhmut. We reached the military recruitment office and were offered an option to remove the fellow from the front lines, take him across the border to Europe. The cost of this service was $32,000. If we had done the same thing at the stage of the call-up notice for military service, the cost would have been $12,000. The military registration and enlistment offices have never seen such money before, and the revenues from bribes are being evenly distributed vertically towards the top. Do you think anyone would turn down that kind of blood money? It turns out it's profitable for the U.S. to fight to the last Ukrainian, and it's profitable for the members of the occupation administration, as dissident news outlets in Ukraine refer to the government regime in Kiev, to draft and send recruits to their deaths." I thought that was fascinating, and I've seen a whole bunch of other stuff. You can come back 94. You can see other stuff about Zelensky and his top aides and stuff making fucking bank, but really it's a propaganda game to get the American public, those who are dumb enough or gullible enough, to
misinformed enough,
us sending our precious fucking resources instead of solving problems here, like maybe making sure that a bridge doesn't fall down when a tanker lights fire. If you heard about like a whole section of the interstate collapsed in Philadelphia.
No.
Yeah.
No, I haven't heard that. Damn it.
Yeah, and I think it was from a tanker fire, so they're like, oh, there was like extraneous circumstances. But realistically, I knew, because when I lived there decades ago, we'd get on the freeway and be like, oh, that doesn't look good. There's like fucking, you can see like exposed rebar through cracks in the concrete. And that's like a fucking interstate that like connects metropolitan. I mean, there's like 3 million people live in Philly.
I-95.
Yeah.
So we turned that 18-wheeler into a structure fire.
I know, right? Exactly. Hell yeah, bruh.
It's true. Basically, due to the lack of maintenance, something that should have been like a terrible tragedy.
These young men are going and being put into the fucking meat grinder with this penetration that you saw in the north before it stopped. It looked like it was going to be like a battle of the bulge type thing, where they were going to push their forces deep and then be surrounded almost on, all the way around. And then it was just going to be a slog and a bloodbath, right?
Yeah.
Which that was a German counteroffensive late in the war where they, tried to reinvade Belgium, basically. If people are unfamiliar with what the Battle of the Bulge is. It's probably one of the more famous battles. I think it was ultimately the one that broke the German army and eventually led to the Allied victory.
Yeah, I think most Americans would do D-Day first, and probably know that afterwards.
What's that? They do D-Day?
Yeah, D-Day, man. Everybody knows D-Day.
As in terms of familiar battles?
Yeah.
People know D-Day. People know Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Although they probably know the Battle of fucking Iwo Jima just because fucking movies.
Hell yeah.
Which is like, fuck that, dude. I would much rather be like Saving Private Ryan. Maybe not Normandy, but like, or any of the fucking beach landings or shit. But I don't know. I mean, war is hell. And I don't want to say I want to be anywhere, but like, I would much rather be like spending most of my time walking across fucking Europe than like trying to like land on a fucking tiny super fortified island in the middle of water.
You know what the super secret is? Like the actual hack submarine duty. Especially nowadays.
Yeah, except during World War II, fucking subs got sank all the goddamn time.
Yeah, but the problem was subs actually had to surface back then for a lot more things than they have to surface for now.
I thought they got hit by like depth charges and shit.
They did. That was much less common. A lot of times they were attacked when they were at the surface running diesel, because they had to do diesel to charge batteries to run the ship. And nowadays you've done away with diesel. You can absolutely get away with like the limitation is food with submarine warfare.
Which in a pinch you can just go back to friendly waters, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, like we were deployed.
Communications? Can you send fucking signals from underwater?
Yes. Well, no. Yes. Okay. Anyway, there's a way to do it. I can't tell to the depth, but yes, you can communicate. But the that's food fair. Thing.
That's what all those little bottles that wash up on the beach are. It's like, bro, I'm hungry. Sent from the USS fucking
Montpelier. The semen, food, though.
Sending from a tube full of semen.
They designed the bunks so that the bottom lip of the first layer was right at the end food line. So, like, say a can of food is a foot tall. That's exactly where the bottom bunk started. So you could push in cans and cans of food and just walk around on top of cans of food for like, the first
that's 2-3 where a lot of our fucking stores are going to be.
Yeah.
Under beds. Yep.
Good call. Yeah. I mean, you could even, hey, who needs any sort of spring mattress or box spring? You just have cans of food. Bam.
All right. Now what are we on to?
We are on to.
Oh, sweet. We're going to be done soon.
Yeah, we're very soon. We're going to talk to.
How much of this is there? There's a lot of this, though, isn't there?
Like 8 minutes.
How about we skip Nate Higgins?
Okay.
Do you want to or no?
Then we're done.
Yeah, but I think there's like 8 minutes of recording plus talking.
There is. Anyway, it just basically talks about how, we're going to have to get used to the idea of utilizing older, more conventional models of heating and cooling of the person, not of the space, because the space is just too expensive and energy inefficient.
Do you want to maybe play the first part and we'll skip the cooling part?
Yeah, sure thing.
Because I think the first part's like 3 minutes, right?
Yeah. 5 almost.
We talk about the HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning to heat and cool buildings and spaces. But in this appropriate lower tech future, your work focuses on heating and cooling people instead of spaces. Can you expand on that?
Pause real quick.
Yes. So
I just wanted to point out, a lot of people, again, with the vegans talking about how eating meat is like murdering the planet or whatever, right? Like heating and cooling, like residential and commercial structures is like a huge wedge. Not a fraction of a small wedge, fraction of a fraction of a small wedge, like greenhouse gas emissions from cows, but like a fat fucking wedge. I forget what it is. You always correct me on numbers. I can't say anything anymore.
I'm not correcting you. I'm looking it up because I want us to be factually accurate.
Isn't it like 15% in the US at least?
65%.
What?
65% of the energy that goes to residential energy is used for heating and cooling applications.
65%
and
of
overall
residential energy. I meant total greenhouse gas emissions. If you look at heating and cooling, just total greenhouse gas emissions, it's significant. Just this is why we'll never finish on time.
20%.
20.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking it was somewhere between like 15 and 20. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, that's just heating and cooling.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, he asks, so you're a proponent of heating and cooling people instead of heating and cooling spaces.
Yes.
And that's where this conversation begins.
Yes.
Let me start with heating, because cooling is pretty similar, but it's handier to keep it apart.
Nope.
So modern heating systems and
yeah, because it's usually pretty easy to escape the cold in one way or another. You get inside of a sealed structure, you get inside of things, and that can be literally all you need. It's like hiding under blankets.
Yeah, using your own body heat by
cooling,
wearing a jacket and trapping your heat on you.
Yeah, cooling in any place that's really hot is going to require above certain temperatures and above certain humidities. It is going to require internal, like inside of a building, the building is cooled because there is, and you're pumping all the excess heat outside into the environment, and there's just no getting around that for a lot of places. And so, like, cooling is a different beast in my mind. And
agreed. But that's kind of like we were working on some appropriate tech with the misters and fans and stuff.
Well, like this guy later on, he talks about like, oh yeah, well in the winter or in the summer, I just take the same water bottle and I freeze it. And it's like, yeah, you freeze it in a freezer that transfers energy into your house. And if you don't have it outside, that then means that your house is now hotter. You have to evacuate that heat from your house some way. Like, there is no free lunch. And he treats it like the old ways are free lunch. Like,
no, because you only watched the clips I provided, right?
Actually, I watched all the way up to like 55 minutes.
Okay. He does mention that, like, this is in the context of having wind and solar energy.
It is.
What he's saying is using that for targeted use as inefficient devices, which could produce ice. And then when you're uncomfortable, warm, you can cool yourself with ice, which is exactly what like my sister and brother-in-law did with the rabbit. When it got fucking hot, they just put an ice block in with the rabbit, and the rabbit puts its belly on the ice block, and the rabbit is fine.
Poor Bunny Boonet. Have they gotten another rabbit since then?
No, but they got a second cat. Did I tell you that?
No.
My sister's becoming a cat lady.
How many does she have? 2 is not a cat lady. We have 4.
Wow.
I don't consider myself a cat fella. I consider myself a fella with too many cats.
All right, carry on.
And cooling systems are pretty peculiar things. What we do is we heat the entire volume of air in a space in order to make people comfortable. And yeah, well, with cooling it's the same. You're gonna cool the whole volume with the air conditioning system, and there's maybe a few people in that space. And it's.
You mentioned the video quality and being concerned about it. I'm not concerned about video quality. Look at the video quality of this video. Like,
that's true.
We've actually got. It's one of the last things on my mind. Right off the bat, I try to make sure that we had at least 1080p, and so like we're good.
Yeah, I do want to mention that kind of heating the volume of air thing, though, right? Because when you think about it, like my house is very well air sealed and insulated, but many houses are not.
Right.
And so, like, you're heating air and then it's just fucking leaking out. Because if it's cold outside and warm inside, like, the fucking laws of thermodynamics don't want that to be the case.
Our heating is surprisingly easy here because we have upstairs neighbors. And so they're heating their place. We occasionally heat our place, but, like, it's Fresno. It doesn't get that cold. For the most part, I can, like, turn on the computer, have it do some sciencey, crunchy shit, and have a fan throw the air to the rest of the house.
Or what we do more baking.
Making,
like, let's make some zucchini bread or whatever.
Dude, I made pizza in the barbecue the other day. Damn near perfect. I hadn't thought of it, and then I was like, oh, they just needed to get up to like 600-700 degrees. My fucking barbecue gets up to like 900.
Yeah, ours gets pretty warm too for firing on all cylinders. I usually try and skimp for gas, but it easily, even not running all the burners like full, it's easily 550, 600. Yeah.
I realized how much I hadn't cleaned it. Like I just set them all to high.
And then shit on the bottom while it's on fire.
Yeah.
I need to clean my grill too.
Shooting out the back, and I was like, oh, I got work to do.
This could be potentially dangerous.
But I have learned that if you do 700 degrees for 6 minutes, you'll get a pretty damn good pizza.
Nice.
Because I did 700 for 5 minutes and got a mediocre pizza.
Fair enough. Carry on.
Extremely energy inefficient. It's comparable to cars, actually, where 95% of the energy goes into moving the vehicle instead of moving the passenger. And our modern heating and cooling systems are very similar in that sense.
That's why we
I'm right now.
Remember when Mr. Garrison got mad at the airlines and invented a super fast means of transportation?
Oh, yes, I recall.
It was like a little wheel that you sat on, but you had to put it up your ass, and then you had to suck it off to make it go.
Turns out you didn't have to do either of those.
And then people remove that, and they're like, "We just figured it out. You could remove this and do it a different way." He's like, "Why would you do that?" Anyway.
Oh my god, fantastic!
In a 8-room building, that the whole thing is being cooled. But I'm the only person in the building right now. I'm just sitting here doing this with you. So it's
and that has a lot to do with not enough. I'm gonna preach technology as a solution to this one particular instance. They could have thermostats in every single room. They could have
like a mini split.
Yeah, a mini split and occupancy, and know that at the front door, this guy scanned his badge. He's currently the only person in there. Close all louvers except for that. Turn on the AC for that one place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, and he talks about efficiency in a second, so I won't spoil it. But I mean, efficiency can solve a lot of problems if you try.
You know what I'm thinking would probably be one of the better solutions, especially in fucking hot climates. Because pumps don't use a ton of electricity. Certainly less than a fucking a 1.5 ton central AC unit.
Oh yeah,
right. Certainly less than that. Do either just some kind, either just straight water or possibly some kind of refrigerant with a briny water or something, and then pump that. Or warm water, basically a radiative heating, but integrated into your sleeping pod. So you can just yeah.
He's not in a sleeping pod. He's in an office.
Or in your office.
He's in a oh god, what's it called? We Share? Is that what the place is called?
Maybe.
Or Work Share. We Work. That's what it's called. There we go.
Oh yeah, little incubator hubs. They pop up with places that do work by themselves on their computers, can actually be around people.
It looks like he has books in the background. In reality, he's just sitting inside of a VR hub. He's got much better background technology than we do. I envy him.
It's just like driving
give me your secrets
car. But go on. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. So if you look at how people were kind of finding thermal comfort before the Industrial Revolution, or actually, you don't have to go that far back, before the 1950s. There was no central heating systems. There was not this ample supply of fossil fuels that made it possible. And so there
also wasn't the technology.
The strategy was totally different. They were heating people instead of spaces. And there were different ways to do that. The first is to use a radiant heat source. And that is, of course, originally the fireplace, but then later it became the stove. and that is a different type of heating. So the share of radiation is much higher than the share of convection. And that means that you're not creating an equal temperature in the whole space. The closer you get to the heating system, the warmer it gets, and the further away you get from it, the cooler it gets.
Yeah, my wife was saying when she was a kid visiting her grandparents, they would all just sleep in the living room.
Well, that's how the fucking Soviet Union did, and dude, it gets cold in fucking Moscow in the winter.
Well, that's how it.
And they built apartment blocks.
Honestly,
and then
that's
they have
how it
a
used to
power
be.
plant, and the excess heat from the power production gets put in a pipe, and they pump it through all the apartment blocks.
Yeah.
And then if you want your radiator on, not only are you always getting warm, I've actually heard that in the winter sometimes it gets so hot they have to open windows.
Yeah,
The hot
that's
water,
actually
they're not in control of the hot water. Sorry,
right. No, you're 100% correct. You absolutely do have to open the windows. During the Spanish flu, we'll call it that, they actually, in New York City, they put in all those steam pipes specifically so people could stay inside, be heated, and still have airflow. They wanted to produce so much extra heat that you would open your windows on purpose in order to let the air
and
out.
so they just have a pipe that runs through their room between floors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's warm in and of itself, because and if they want, they can turn the valve and the water will run through their fucking radiator.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so they can extract more heat for themselves.
Exactly.
But essentially they're like, no, if I close up and leave that pipe will keep the fucking room warm while I sleep. Mm-hmm. And then during the day, often I'm like, I want some crisp air because it's kind of like hot and muggy in here.
Crank it up and
that's just like how much more efficient is that?
So people underestimate during the winter just how hot a human body gets. And I will say that I alone make my room intolerable most of the year. Doesn't matter, winter with the window open. I create so much body heat. You throw my wife into the mix, that room is fucking probably like 70 degrees during the winter, worst case scenario here.
We put drapes over the windows, heavy drapes, and we have like like a storm window, which adds like, I don't know, it's like 6 or 8 or 9R to the window, because windows actually are not all that efficient in terms of like their R value.
Even if they're double pane,
yeah, exactly. They're not perfect. Even double pane, I think, are less than 10 or maybe less than 15.
Yeah.
Not a lot. At any rate, we use a heavy drape, and generally a down blanket. And it's always when it's cold, when it's 65 degrees in the house and you crawl into the covers for the first time, it's kind of chilly. But guess what? 40 minutes later, with 2 people in bed, as long as you keep that fucking down cover blanket over you, you don't get cold.
Yeah. It's interesting that both he and you mentioned the 50s, because like I was reading, I got a hold of some like shit from my family that my mom didn't want anymore. And I was just like, well, let me read through it before I throw it away. And I found a bunch of stuff from my grandma, like written to one of my cousins. And she was saying, I was like, oh, how many, kids or how many brothers and sisters did you have? Oh, how many rooms were there? And she was like, oh, during, the warm months, there were 2 rooms for the children, or no, 3 rooms for the children. And the oldest, daughter had a room all to herself. During the winter months, though, the heat didn't reach her room. And so she had to sleep with the other 2 girls during the winter.
He's going to talk about that here in just a minute. I think this clip ends with them talking about that.
It absolutely does, yes.
Yeah.
So what people did was actually creating a microclimate of thermal comfort in a rather cold space. And people could choose where they would sit or stand. So if you were to...
I know we did want to kind of spend some time on this, and really what happened is we lost a bunch of time on the ones I wanted to gloss over, but just talk about briefly.
Okay,
anyway, no, just that, because like rethinking heating the person versus heating the space, or this concept of thermal comfort. Like, it's okay to not just be warm enough to survive. Like, it's okay to want to be comfortable.
Right.
But like, how we get comfortable is the question that needs to be answered. Is it efficient to cool down the entire house when realistically we're only using 1 or 2 rooms at a time?
Right. And I do kind of, and that's where I have to look at the numbers and I say like, okay, cool. If you only want to cool one room, for most people, the option is to have like a window unit. Because we're on a budget. You know, you can't afford to have a big one with louvers and all that cool shit that automatically block off the rooms that aren't occupied. But like you end up, instead of using a larger, more efficient unit, you use several smaller, less efficient units, but you only cool 1 or 2 rooms at a time. And sounds great until you need to cool all the rooms because they're actually occupied. And it's like at that point, you know, the central one with smarter.
I think that if we were having company over in the summertime when it was hot as balls,
yeah,
we would probably run the central AC.
Nowadays.
What do you mean?
Oh, in the past you didn't?
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, I run it on it. Honestly, it's already come up. Oh, it's like 78 degrees in here. Can you turn on the air? I was like, put a wet towel on your fucking neck.
Why is she still with you?
I don't know. I ask myself that every day.
You got to ask the more important question. Why are you with her?
Maybe. Let's talk about this offline.
Big brain.
I feel. At any rate, my point is this concept of thermal comfort is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because that's really what's important, right? And that's why I like these ideas of these like Mr. Fan systems for the chickens. Like, we're never going to cool the whole space.
Yeah.
We just need to make a little bubble of air that's a bit more comfortable than the air over there, right? Yeah, and this same goes for heat and stuff. We're still talking about. Go ahead.
Too hot, you moved away from the stove, and if you were too cold, you were coming closer, or you were gonna sit on top of it. And that's of course much more energy efficient in the sense that the energy use is independent of the size of the room, and you can be comfortable at lower air temperatures because
I would say we also need to design places that are less big, and you're inadvertently seeing that with the current generation of houses being built, just because people can't afford big ass houses.
Yeah.
And so you get smaller, more easily cooled houses. Like
we have higher efficiency standards.
And I look into these old houses and, you know, they're like, oh, it's got vaulted ceilings. And I'm like, great area that I have to cool and heat, you know, like I'm going to put in a fucking drop.
You had like radiant floor heat.
Yeah. Or if you had a drop ceiling, you know, to block off all that extra area. But
the radiant floor heat is really effective though.
Oh, absolutely. But you won't see it here in the United States as a standard. It's very standard in a lot of other countries that experience incredible cold.
But it could be a standard. You said you'll never see it as a standard. It could be a standard. Oh. The reason it's not a standard is because the way, as we've talked about on the show a dozen times before, we build the housing that is most profitable for the developer.
And we also take little feedback from the people that they're being built for. Like, I kind of want to start walking through new builds on houses and just, you know, with the person who's in charge, you know, get to the bathrooms and be like, I noticed the bathrooms don't have a central drain. What's up with that? And they're like, excuse me? You know, a drain so I can easily wash my bathroom, you know, and everything goes down the drain. No, we don't have that. I can't buy this house. Just, you know, vote with your dollar for simple, cool shit like that. Central drain in your bathroom. Vital.
Oh, you mean like one in the middle of the floor? So
in the middle of the floor. Yeah.
If I was to design my own house, I'd have a floor drain in the bathroom. I'd have fucking a mop sink in the fucking laundry room, right? Like just a little floor tub to fucking like scrub shit out in.
Stainless steel everywhere. I'm trying to replicate a submarine bathroom.
Stainless could be nice. I might do a little bit different. It depends. But in the kitchen, stainless, baby.
Just fucking spray the whole thing down.
Hell yeah, dude, on a fucking floor drain. Why not? Because then if you make a big mess, like you don't have to like gingerly like wipe it up. You can just be like throw a bucket of water, throw another bucket of water, squeegee it all towards the drain, and be done. Like.
So we need to vote with our dollars and make this the standard in the United States as well. All right. Anyway, carry on.
You increase the share of radiation in the heat transfer, and you can be comfortable at a lower energy temperature. Like radiant heat is comparable to the heat you get from the sun. And
I like this guy's room. He has like no airs about him. Like there's a globe, there's a backpack that may or may not have been used. All the horizontal surfaces are just absolutely covered in living. It looks like there's a toolbox to the right, and his wall is just.
He lives in an apartment above a bar in Barcelona.
Oh, okay.
Actually, it's at the end of this that we're not going to get to.
Yeah.
He brings up some of this heat, or maybe he does. I'll save my comment. Carry on.
We all know this effect. If you are, say, in winter, you are sitting in the sun, it can be quite comfortable, even if it's like only, say, 10 degrees Celsius. But if then someone comes to stand in front of you, suddenly the air temperature remains the same, but suddenly you're cold because this person takes away your radiant heat source. And the second thing was that people made use of personal heating devices that worked through conduction. And conduction is another type of heat transfer that is actually physical contact between a heat source and a human. So, of course, the temperature needs to be lower or you get burned. Like if you
electric blanket, y'all.
That might be a much more efficient way to warm yourself rather than warming your whole house.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I lived in New York through a winter, and if we tried to heat the whole, like we had a fireplace and we had wood. So we just like burnt that thing every day that it was even moderately cold. But like, if we didn't have that, we would have spent a hell of a lot more money because I could put the blanket on low and be totally fine. And all my roommates had the same.
Yep.
Like setup, you're just
everybody
in a room
playing Xbox under their own electric blanket.
No, man. I think this might have been before the Xbox. This
probably was like PS1.
This was the year 2000 to 2001. We were playing on our computers, playing the first Diablo. Diablo 2 had not come out yet.
Nice.
What?
I remember that was the only time I ever had a LAN party with friends in college. I think that was before the internet was really reliable.
Yes.
You actually had to hardwire computers together.
We had the internet
to play MMOs. Yeah.
And we had gotten cable at that point. It was available in our area. And so we got it. But I mean, it's still very low. But oh my God. Yeah, we had a whole house LAN. No wireless, of course, because that didn't exist yet. And so we just had all of our computers hooked up to the same network, and we fucking played, Diablo on crazy difficulties. No, Diablo 2 did exist. It was right after it came out, maybe same year. But man, super fucking fun as a LAN. And you're just yelling at it. Yeah, electric blankets and yell. Well, and the computer helps to heat up the room. And you just yell at each other. You bitch, you got killed.
The cooking fire, you're gonna get burned. But if you have a lower temperature heat, like a hot water bottle, you can directly transfer heat from the heating device to your body. And that's, of course, the max in thermal efficiency. You need very little energy to keep yourself comfortable. And so originally, these personal heating devices, they were based on...
That was the end of that one. So yeah,
I mean, make little radiant panels like that you can buy. It's like kind of like a plastic or rubbery kind of flattish membrane with PEX or whatever running through it. And so you can make like decorative radiant panels or something. And I thought about that as like a really great, like just a headboard and a footboard.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And then have like them connected to a pump. For cooling, it might not be quite as effective.
No.
But the system with the heat exchanger and the evaporative cooler that we've been working on, not really working on, it's someone else's idea. We're just trying to piece it all together in an effective delivery system.
Readily available equipment.
But dude, I mean, if that cools the air 25, 30 degrees below ambient air temperature, and then you're able to heat transfer with virtually no loss, because the temperature of the water in the evaporative cooling unit and the temperature of the air coming off of the heat exchanger is almost identical. It's only slightly warmer off the heat exchanger. Like, if you could cool air 30 degrees, like, and you can run that whole system on like fucking 80 watts, like, and that actually can cool space, right?
Yeah.
If you insulate your spaces. Is this a hot water bottle?
That's what I'm thinking of. I always think of the old cartoons, and I remember having one as a kid, and we put ice, we put water in it. But yeah, you just fill it with
These are also like chemical chem warmers. What do you call them?
Yeah, but those are so temporary, they're not even worth talking about.
No, but this is a much more effective way if you had a means of boiling water.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
A solar hot water heater.
Right. And then,
or even in the winter, it gets hot. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you can put ice in it and everything. And we had those. When I was a kid, we didn't use them very often, but it just made me think of like the ones in the cartoons. Is the first thing I thought of when he started talking about water bottles. I know he might have a different idea in mind, but that's what I thought of.
Yeah, 100%. That's kind of what I pictured too. Because he mentioned, they made them out of wood and steel and this, that, and the other thing. But pretty much once they had rubber, they made them all out of rubber.
Yeah, I mean, you can make it out of a sheep's bladder.
Oh yeah, sheep bladder.
Why the hell not? Let's include our Irish and Scottish neighbors.
We got to the end of this yet?
That was the end of the first one. We can stop here.
Okay, that's all we were going to do it. When he says, I have a hot water bottle to keep me warm. It's called a golden retriever.
No. He didn't. We didn't get to that. But yeah, he talks about how he has a golden retriever, and the guy's like, we should all have animals and whatnot.
Because back in the day,
but they don't help to cool. And what's funny is my first thought is like, man, that's how you get zoonotic diseases. Sleep when
Did you know that's how a lot of diseases that cross from humans between humans and animals came to be?
Yeah,
like
I don't doubt that at all.
common diseases came from animals.
Yeah, it's called zoonotic, or I think it's zoonotic or zoonotic. I forget.
Yeah. Just meaning it comes from animals.
It looks like zoo, but yeah.
As far as like civilized people having diseases that they then carried to the Western Hemisphere, Native Americans who had no antibodies for any of it because they'd never seen it. Those diseases all came from basically like living with animals.
Yeah. And everything's all fun and games until you sleep with a pangolin.
Yeah, I just heard some University of Pennsylvania professor, Penn State professor apparently was fucking his dog in front of a trail camera. Anyway, speaking of zoonotic diseases, I just can't help but think of how COVID started because fucking
Randy Marsh
fucked a pangolin.
Hey, Mickey Mouse was complacent,
he was trying to sell weed in China, and then fucking Disney runs China now, or whatever.
Anyway, that was the end of the show.
I thought that was interesting. I like the concept of heating people instead of space.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds
one of the
good.
Things I've always said is like, are you cold? Well, maybe you shouldn't be walking on tile floors in your bare feet in the winter. Like,
I mean, there are some very obvious solutions, but
slippers.
But there's something to be said for just walking into a giant mall with vast vaulted ceilings and being completely air conditioned in the middle of the summer.
Oh, that's absurd too. But I think you're right. If you have an insulated space and like a split unit or something where you could only use as much energy as required, and you had a fairly tight envelope. And that's the thing, is that most houses in America don't have tight envelopes.
No. And what's sad is the further you get east, aka back in time, the more often you have houses from like the 17 or 1800s that have no sort of modern insulation, because the people who get them can't afford to add more insulation. So they just deal with it.
The technology wasn't the same.
Well, yeah,
so
but
what you would have probably done is used old wool battens, like fleeces that were not of good enough quality to be made into thread.
Right. And what really sucks is if you want to modernize and add in like 2x4s and drywall and R-rated insulation and stuff like that, R-rated in a good way. It's gonna not only cost you money, but you're gonna lose space. You're gonna lose about 4 inches out of every single wall because it has to be on the inside of your and a lot of these places are still pretty big, but yeah, it's something to think about. You're losing square footage based on the fact that your outer wall is brick and your inner wall is whatever you make it.
Yeah, and so think of things like concepts in like green architecture, like what do you call it, passive solar design. All that is you using that concept of thermal comfort and the efficiency of a radiative heat transfer instead of conductive, right? Is that you just have the sun come through some windows and warm up your big fucking rock wall, and then throughout the day or throughout the night, that is radiating heat, and it is a comfortable place.
Yes. And then water bottles where necessary.
Yeah, and then like I'm saying, like I would probably I think space heat's cool if you just want to like dick around or have guests or something. But if you're going to bed, like it doesn't make a lot of sense to heat the whole fucking house when you're sleeping.
No, and that's the big shame is really when it comes to the winter, I want room to room control. Because like as soon as we go to bed, that's 6 to 8 hours where I do not need any other part of the house to be warm. Because the cats, if they get cold, they'll just fucking huddle together.
And they're never gonna get cold enough to kill them here. Because they have fur coats.
Yeah.
Some of us have fur coats, like my friend Zach Baka the Wookiee. All right, everybody. We were talking about, we had a kind of little digression there on HVAC systems, which I thought was cool because I like that concept of like thermal comfort and the idea of heating and cooling people, not spaces. Because I really do think that we have to find ways to adjust our own behaviors toward the ends of maintaining our comfort while also being sensitive to the fact that the fossil fuels we use to heat and cool ourselves are almost guaranteeing our destruction. He does mention later on, I was going to say at the end of the clip, he lives above a bar in Barcelona, and he actually would bring hot water bottles for his friends when he would meet friends there.
Talking about that,
so they could hang out and fucking eat tapas and smoke and like drink wine or whatever and hang out. And so he'd bring them hot water bottles, and the bar thought it was such a great idea that they actually just created a station so that other patrons there, and they did the math on it, which is the most important part. They did the math, especially for like a commercial business where you're running like propane patio heaters and shit like that.
Yeah.
Like how much energy can we save if we just make people comfortable rather than trying to heat this air in this losing battle against ambient air temperature?
Right. Yeah.
And so anyway, and I've seen other systems with like I was at a hot spring in New Mexico where they just had like a big arbor with really closely spaced, so it was open to rain and stuff, but it was closely spaced and had vines on it. And so even though it wasn't closed, the fireplace underneath that captured all the heat, and it created basically like a warm air bubble. And you step beyond that pergola by several feet and it was frigid, and you step back underneath that and you were warm, and again radiative heating too. So there, I think there was a mix of the radiative from the fire, if you were real cold you can get close to the fire, and the convective in the sense that you kind of trapped this warm air so you can kind of be comfortable walking around. If you're cold you can move closer, if you're comfortable in the air that's trapped you can be further, but generally speaking it was still significantly warmer than beyond the boundary of that. So anyway, we talk about these things because ultimately like we're fighting wars over resources, right? And we're using resources, and staying warm or staying cool is an essential metabolic function since humans are animals. And with that said, I'll give a sign off. Remember, folks, when liberty dies, it dies
without AC.
That is true. Now, when liberty dies, like, come on, you think that you can't have freedom without an air conditioner? Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, my friend.
Nothing left to cool.
Nothing left to cool. Hey, bro, you want to be cool all the time? Go find a place on planet Earth that's cold. Hey, here, how about this?
It's prohibitively expensive.
How about this? Move to fucking where my partner grew up. she just had somebody she knows who still lives there posted 28 degrees today. Really wish summer would come. Do you want it to be 28 degrees in July?
But she's a woman and therefore from Venus. You'd be very hot.
You're wrong. Yeah, that doesn't really make sense, does it? Why are men from Mars? Mars is the better planet. Mars is more likely to sustain life than Venus.
False.
No?
No.
I know very little.
It would actually take less geoengineering to make Venus habitable. Because you could basically put up a...
Why haven't we sent a probe there then?
We've sent plenty of probes. What are you talking
do we have probes there? Where's
so
our fucking rover?
We've landed there. We've landed there.
Have we?
We've landed there.
See, I don't give a shit because I'm just trying to avoid not getting nuked as my government like picks fights with nuclear powers over nothing.
You can't avoid that, man. You're better off thinking about Venus. You just put up a big shade in space.
Oh,
cool.
I almost said the wrong word. It rhymes
there,
with Venus,
Freud.
but that's what you love. You love the Venus.
We cuss all the time. I think you can say an anatomical.
Big veiny Venuses.
Big veiny Venus. Veiny.
All right, I already signed up with thunderous applause. The Liberty guys with thunderous applause. Blah, blah, blah. Peace.
There you go.
See you later, buddy.
Bye, man.